Okay, so we're really excited to talk with you today. I think we definitely just want to talk about your experiences and women in design. You know, a lot of women out there right now. There's a big community growing with women in industrial design.
Thank
And
goodness, after 50 years. I mean, oh,
I want to kind of introduce yourself and just
sure.
the quick 2 minute spiel.
Sure.
Who is Lucia?
Okay, who is Lucia? Lucia N. DeRespinis is an industrial designer that's ancient. She graduated at a time when the world was very different in 1952 from Pratt Institute, who taught you to be able to design anything. Once you understood a Pratt approach, you designed everything. And that's what I did. My father died when I was 14, and my mother was an accountant, and she had a mathematical mind. So she immediately went back and had something that she was terrific at. And so it just became normal for me, even as a woman. And you figure my mother, this was in the 19 early 40s, late 39, 40. My father died in 1941. So I had a pattern that, yes, you just go back and you take what you've learned and you apply it. So I had that approach all the way through. And just because I was a woman in a Pratt class of 60 some men and two women, and the other woman had come because her boyfriend was coming to Pratt, and she came and she was interested. She was very good graphically, and she went into interiors eventually in her profession. So I just said, well, sure, why not? And I did. So I saw industrial design when, at the time at Pratt, there were only two women and 63 men in the class. Luck comes to you. And I always say it's 90% luck. And the 10% you better be prepared for. I was walking along the street at Pratt and my first year, and I had a 3D, which is their three-dimensional course. I was carrying it to Pratt. And I met a friend who was a senior, and he said, what are you going to major in? I said, graphics. That's why I came to Pratt. And he said, look at that. I said, so what? And he said, mm-mm. He said, you're going into industrial design. And I said the same thing, all men, no women. And he said, so what? And I went back and I thought, so what? So I changed. I went from graphics to industrial design, and boy, am I glad I did. I was very fortunate, got a job immediately. And then I just ignored the fact that I was a woman and just glided along. And then, unfortunately, when I was 43 and our daughter, because I had married about 5 years after graduating from Pratt, and our daughter was 7, my husband had a brain embolism, as it is, and he felt strange, and he had a pain in his back, and he went to the doctor's office and collapsed and died.
Oh, no.
And they called me. I was on a freelance job. They said, Lucia DeRespinis, yeah, well, your husband just died. What? And I'll tell you, your profession keeps you alive at that time. You don't have time to think. You just go back and you work like hell. And that's what I did. And it saved me. And that's what I told the students in class, that your profession will save you. If you love to do it, then you do it. And nothing gets in the way. And that was true. And then, of course, we had to think about where one was going to earn a living. And I had no problem that way because I had made a lot of contacts when I was earlier with George Nelson. So I'd made contacts. But that had a lot to do with the fervor with which I approached my profession. And I worked like mad and made the contacts. There was no email. There was no computer. It was the hard way to do it. You looked in the New York Times? No, because everybody else looked in the New York Times. You just used to call everybody you know. And of course, at that time, large organizations didn't want to hire women, really. You walk in with your portfolio. In fact, I used to walk into manufacturers with all my stuff, In those days, I didn't have a backpack. And that wasn't what you carried around, but you carried around a sack of stuff. And they'd say, "Oh, Lucia, oh yeah, where's your boss?" And I'd say, "I'm the boss." It was so funny. They'd always be surprised that a woman was industrial design. And even if they didn't have any feelings one way or the other, they were always surprised. And that went on for quite a few years. Yeah, I think the whole idea of having a profession that you love is so important.
Yeah.
In industrial design, you never lose that. You walk down the street and you think, why did they do that? How is that made? Why does that stand up? That's the wrong color, constantly. And I told the students for years that you'll never be happy, even when you sit down, because the table is too high, too low, too narrow, too deep. Everything is designed wrong. So, and you're going to make it all right. So you get used to that after a while. And I still, at my age of 93 right now, 94 in May, and I would still be teaching, except that my glaucoma wouldn't let me teach for any longer virtually. I can't see the screen after a while. I was teaching for 6 hours on the screen, and it was just too difficult. So I said, I guess it's time to quit. I told the chair of the industrial design department. He said, "Oh no, you can't quit." And I said, "You want to see me?" I quit. You can't do that. But I will go back when one can be a little bit more normal in your day-to-day activity. I will go back to Pratt. They said, "Could you come in and make some presentations and talk to students and crit some stuff and be in class?" I said, "Yeah, later on." But generally, my life has been terrifically good. I mean, in spite of the fact that my husband died at an early age, to be able to always be involved with the world around me. And that's what you are when you're an industrial designer, whether you're a woman or a man. But because you're a woman, you have to work extra hard at it. It's the same old thing. I mean, even when you're teaching, that used to be a problem, that the men were always the chair of the department and whatever. At Pratt, it's still a little bit that way.
Yeah.
But it's changing.
That's great.
And the head of the design school is a woman and has been. And now the president of Pratt is a woman.
Oh,
So,
wow.
So it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I wonder, just backtracking, when you were a child, because you've done so many things in your career, industrial design, graphics, exhibitions, interiors. When you were a child, what did you want to be when you grow up,
I didn't think I'd ever grow up. I was having too much fun as a kid.
That's the dream, right?
I just knew that I would just do something interesting. I would always, my father was an executive, and he died of his fourth heart attack. When he would come home at night, besides playing, because he was a good pianist, And he had a woodworking shop down the cellar. So at a very early age, I was downstairs and he would make things just automatically. And I would be his assistant. I would always hand him the right nail and hand him the right screw and the screwdriver. And it was really fun. And I got really interested in building things.
Yeah.
But I drew well, so thought I'd go into graphics, but that's why I had chosen graphics and never even thought about. But when I think back afterwards, when I thought back, I was always building something three-dimensionally down that cellar. When my father died, I took over what he had down there. But of course, there were no automatic tools. There were hand tools. And I used to build things with hand tools. And that's understanding the material, understanding how much pressure it takes to do this, or how close to the edge you can put a screw before it breaks through the side, those sorts of things. And I didn't realize until later that all those experiences you have when you're a child feed in to what you eventually are doing one way or another.
Yeah, and I think that's something that so many industrial designers can relate to, because a lot of people, they either don't know what industrial design is, or they didn't realize that that is their path. You know, they go into graphics or they go into architecture, something similar, and
Right. And
just
then they say, oh, in fact, I have friends whose son was that way. And if he had known that industrial design existed, they lived in the Middle West at the time.
yeah.
And they somehow were not connected, even though there were well-educated people and all, but they didn't know industrial design. When his parents told him about what I was doing years ago, I remember he said, that's what I should have done.
Yeah, I think industrial designers are really lucky when they actually find that spot in education. I love your origin story with how you got into industrial design, just running into someone with a 3D model. Like,
That was amazing. And I went home and thought, no, just being a woman, because that wasn't really something I considered as a negative. The first job was because I was a woman, which makes it so interesting. I was at Pratt and I said, well, I'll go to the Pratt Department of, Employment and see what they have online. And no, not online, on telephone or whatever.
yeah.
In fact, I went in and they said, well, there's some designer called Monty Levin, and he does a lot of hardware and gutsy stuff. They need someone, and they said a woman. I said, oh, great, okay. So I go to 47th Street between Madison and Fifth, and go up to the small office with portfolio in hand. And Monty looks at it. He said, okay. He said, this is great. Sure. So he said, you'll sit over here. Yeah, it was a drafting table. And then right next to the drafting table was a telephone.
Mm.
And he said, would you mind answering it when it rings? And I said, no, it's okay. And I thought, aha. He asked for a woman because he wants a woman's voice on the phone.
Mm.
And in those days, that would sound as if you had someone in the front office that was answering the phone, and then they would let you speak to whoever. So I thought, I'll go along with this for a while. So when he figured that I could do all this stuff in another 2 weeks, it was, and I was working with an engineer on some plastic things, little plastic things for kids that they were designing. That was my project. When he realized I could work with an engineer, and I knew, how to work, and I could work in at that time, both in centimeters and millimeters, and because I had taught myself that, because I figured I had to know it. And one day I said, Monty, can we move the phone so that everyone can answer it because it does interfere a bit? And he said, oh, sure, because by that time he wasn't going to fire me. So that was the first job I ever had. And as a woman, I got it because I was a woman. And that was
Wow.
really funny. And he thought I never understood that. And of course, it was so obvious. He thought it was a big secret, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was there for about 3.5 years, or 3 years, I guess it was. And then this is where luck enters into it.
Yeah.
I had a friend, Jim Balkus, and he had done a lot of graphics work too. We had graduated together from Pratt.
Mhm.
So he lived down in the village, and one day I thought I'd go down and see him. So rang his bell, and his partner, who was beautifully gay, his partner dressed in these gorgeous clothes
Wow.
as a woman, just beautiful stuff. And I knew him fairly well. So I said, oh, you're looking beautiful today. He said, thank you. And he was a great guy. I liked him very much. So I had talked to Jim, and he said, incidentally, George Nelson's looking for someone. Why don't you wear a black dress and go over and see him? So, of course, women weren't wearing pants then, believe it or not. So I went over, and George looked at all the stuff, and then he called another guy in. I forget his name. He was the engineering guy too. And they called him in. He said, I heard him say something like, could you work on that? So and he's looking at the portfolio, and he sees the detailed drawings and all. And well, I guess. And so I'm sort of sitting over there on the side, you know. So George looked up and he said, okay, you're hired. Just like that. And I thought, wow. So I told Monty I was leaving, and he said, oh. And I said, yeah, give me a week. I'll go over. And I said, is that enough time? He said, no. I said,
Oh,
well, they need somebody over there in a week. So I started with George Nelson, then I was with George for about 10, 11 years.
oh, wow.
We did the American exhibit in Moscow. I did the clocks that you see at MoMA, still selling,
Yes.
and Design Within Reach is still selling them. We did just wonderful stuff. That office was set up so beautifully. I was the only woman that wasn't, I was the only industrial designer who was a woman. And there
Okay.
were about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 industrial designers. So I was the only woman. But the whole office was open except for George. It was the front office, and then the vice president, John Pyle, and Irving Harper, vice president, and Gordon Chadwick, architect, had these other smaller offices in front of us, and then we were all lined up. It was interior designers over here, industrial designers here, graphic designers here, architect there. I mean, this was a postgraduate situation.
Yeah.
We walk around and look at each other's work and crit each other's work, and it was just great
Mhm.
because they were all used to that. And I'd say, well, why did you do this? And they said, well, because of so. And then we'd have this conversation. So that office was the best, really, the best way to run an organization, because we did everything from
Yeah.
from little things from flatware to clocks to crystal to big exhibits to the World's Fair and in New York City to the World's Fair out in the West Coast. I did a whole big thing for Abbott Laboratories out there.
I feel a lot of consultancies these days, they have a huge breadth of work, but it's all industrial design where a designer might work on toys, the next day tech, the next day stationery, but you worked on a wider scale of design, not only
Very
industrial.
well.
So what was that like?
I mean, my first job, George said, go with Chad. We're doing a thing representing George Nelson, but there were 5 other designers over at the Brooklyn Museum, and they want things set up with the things that we've designed plus the things in their collection. And he said, just go over and pick out some stuff from our catalog, from the Herman Miller catalog, because we were designing all the Herman Miller stuff, except that Charlie Eames was doing some work too for Herman Miller. He used to come to the office all the time, so I got to know him and write pretty well. I said, just go over and set up a room. So, okay. So I picked things from their collection, a harpsichord, and I mean, it was really great fun. And then some Herman Miller things, and then there were 2 rooms. It was supposed to be a sitting room sort of, and then a bedroom. So I picked Charlie Eames' bed and then put, what did I put in the corner? I don't know, but it was great fun. So that was the first job I ever had at George Nelson's. Then it was designing a kind of window, ideas for a particular kind of window for a particular situation. I can't remember what that was. And then there were clocks, of course, and those are the ones that are still being sold at MoMA.
I like that you touched on that you got to know Charles and Ray Eames as well. And I'm curious what it was like, kind of the top people in design during that time, and especially being a woman. A lot of times in the past, it seems like men maybe overshadowed women who actually designed.
Always.
So what was that like?
Always. Never question the fact that I'm sure I was paid less.
Yeah.
Because it was a time and place that was very different.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't anyone that was going to go out with a sign and rage against women. I was too busy. I had to make a living, and my daughter was going to be going to college, and I can't fool around. So you sort of stuck with the things that you were doing.
Yeah.
You knew that that Industrial Design magazine was saying everything that I did was George Nelson. And everything was that way. The individual designer didn't get credit. Big offices were what industrial design was about at that time. So the big Teague, Dreyfus, all these big offices, and George Nelson, they would put the name of the big office because the big office was the one that got the publicity for a profession that nobody really knew very well in those days. And it wasn't something that flowed off the tongue easily. Industrial what? Design? Are you designing for industry? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you design machines? So it was just a matter of you just sticking to what you were doing, really. And there's no other way to describe that time for people today.
Yeah.
It was such a totally different environment, the world was.
Did you ever see some type of women in design community arise at some time?
No, there were no other industrial designers that were women.
Yeah.
I mean, there just weren't any. All the other design offices were all men, and they were all big offices. And so when ID Magazine wanted to know who designed something, they gave the name of the big office you were with.
Right.
And it was only in the 1990s, as late as that, late 80s, early 90s. And I think I have the original magazine. that finally the clocks that I was doing at that time, they came downstairs and they said, "Who designed these clocks, really?" And they finally put my name in. And it took all those years, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, almost 35, let's say 35 to 40 years before designers really got their names and before women finally got their names on on what they designed. But I don't know of any other women. Most of the women that were with IDSA in those days, and I used to go to the meetings, and I got fed up because they were all men making presentations, and the women would do the research. They were the ones taking the notes, as you well know. There was all that list of things that women were available for as far as an office, and as far as entrepreneurial, that was really outside, way outside what women would be involved with. You
Yeah.
needed someone to back you up, someone well-known to promote you, like Florence Knoll, who knew all the field and everything, and when she was younger and went to the school out there for graduate work and had a lot of backup. And that was in interior design. I mean, you can imagine interior industrial design. There were no women that had mentors. I would suggest that all women get an idea of how you run a business.
Yeah.
That is so important because men run businesses. Women now run businesses.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times in the beginning, you hook up with someone, and men didn't want women because first of all, if they were married, their wives didn't like the idea. And this, so the whole gender thing gets involved here.
Yeah.
That to find another woman who's a good businesswoman was very difficult, and you just couldn't do it. But
Yeah.
that's what you need. You need someone who is good in design and someone who's good in business, and they both can overlap. But you need that when you're, unless you're very good at both. And very few women are good at business the way some men are.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not necessarily true anymore.
Right. Yeah, and I think
So,
that's really strong skill to have these days.
absolutely. It's so necessary now. If you want to be entrepreneurial, you better know how to run a business. And
Mm-hmm.
because my daughter is such a business person, she tells me what she learned in her graduate school, and my jaw drops. So much psychology and so much organization. And if you have that sort of background someplace along the way, take some courses in your graduate work in business, you will really be way ahead when you decide to have your own business.
Yeah.
And that's where it is today with your own business. You don't see big design offices anymore.
And so for you, you kind of took the direction to go into teaching. So how did you start that journey with Pratt?
Well, that happened. There was a big overlap because I designed until I was in my 70s, really. And then I just was teaching more. So I thought, well, they said, will you teach another course? It happened that John Pyle, who had been a vice president at George Nelson, called me one day and said, I am retiring and I want to give over the furniture course I've been teaching at Pratt for 20 years,
Wow.
just one day a week for 3 hours. He said, would you take it on? I said, oh, John, I don't teach. And he said, please, he said, you only 3 hours out of your week. just run over to Pratt. You're so conversant with the whole structure of Pratt and all. You don't have anything more to learn. You just go there and tell them what you learned. Okay, I'll take it. I'll take it for a month and see how it goes. So I did. And it was fun getting back to Pratt and seeing some people I had seen before and not seeing people I hadn't seen before. Whole part of it all new. So I just took off from one day, and I had always worked in a freelance way. At George's, I had had my daughter. We were supposed to make a big presentation for the World's Fair on the West Coast. No, for this World's Fair in New York that was in what was it? Not the first one, but the second World's Fair in New York. We were doing the Chrysler exhibit, and we were going to make a presentation. George had been away for a month, and it was given to me to finish designing what generally the buildings would look like, some of them, and to also take charge of building the model, which was about, well, I don't know, it's like 8 feet long. So he came back and he said, "Are you ready?" And he looked, and here I was, very pregnant.
Oh.
And it hadn't shown the month before as much. And I said, "I'm sick every morning. I can't go."
Yeah.
So he said, "Oh." So he made the presentation alone. And I was really sorry about that I couldn't go for the presentation because I'd worked so hard on it.
Mhm.
So that sort of thing happens, and so then I was home for about 6 years, and then I started taking freelance work because I had made some contacts and I was taking freelance. And that's when I heard about, they called me and said that Lou had died in the doctor's office. And
Mhm.
so that was 7 years later. Things had changed a lot in 7 years. And I just had to go back then. But I always worked then freelance. I'd always be making more than the designers that were there, but I was paying my own my own health. In those days, you could do that, but today it would take. I mean, if you were paying your own health, it would take a big chunk of your salary. So because I was always freelance, I'd go in it. They'd say, "Well, this is just one job," and then another one would come along. So for Sandgren and Murtha, for instance, I was there for 8 years or 10 years, but always on a freelance basis. So I was always making more than the other designers in the department, but nobody knew this except me,
Yeah.
which was really funny. And any other design office I worked with was or any freelance job that I did for anyone. That's the way I worked. But you have to be careful when you are a freelancer. You have to really consider all the time you put in. And you're always going to put in more time because as a freelancer, you don't have somebody saying, "Well, remember, this is as high as we can go. So you don't have too many more hours to put into this project." When you're a freelancer, you end up putting much more time in, but it gets to be much more the way you want it. So you have to weigh one against the other. And for a while, I set up as a business and had a drafting board here in the other room and all. But I didn't like working alone like that. I would much rather be in an office with other people around. I don't work well totally alone.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's difficult. There was always work, and once in a while you worry, because things didn't seem to be, especially when the economy in the country was on a downturn in the 80s.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
there was a downturn, and I was looking, well, let's see, how many more months can I go if I don't have a big a big job? But otherwise, I would just pick up other things like friends of friends said, my husband has an office. Could you redesign it for them? I had done interiors, so I said sure. And so but that took a lot more time and effort than I was going to get paid for. I knew that. But
Yeah.
you never say no. When somebody asks you, and I always tell the student, somebody asks you, have you ever done this? Oh yeah, I can do that. Always say yes, because you're bright enough to find out how to do it. And if you've developed your eye, you know when it's right, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then backtracking a little bit, you were talking about your daughter, and I think that's something that a lot of women in design they go through with
Oh yeah.
pregnancy or motherhood. And what was that like being an industrial designer as you came into motherhood?
Well, um, I wasn't working for those years,
Hmm.
because at the Nelson office was when she was born. And then I didn't pick up for any, in fact, I didn't make the decision. Somebody called me and said, we have some freelance that we'd like to give you. And I thought, well, okay, I guess I can do it. And it was about a year before Lou died, which was very providential,
Yeah.
that I should be back designing, even on a freelance basis, and on a maybe one day a week. And then where I was going, they said, well, can you manage 2 days a week? And yes, I said, well, okay. And by that time, my daughter was she was 7. So I said, yeah, I guess I can manage that. And that's the same person I was with when Lou died. And he said, we could use you 4 days a week. And he was a distributor of tableware to the restaurant industry. So he had these connections with manufacturers of china and glassware and flatware and all. And that's what started me off on designing for tabletop. And that's one of the syllabi, no, syllabuses. It's not syllabi, it's syllabuses uh, that I designed for Pratt. They had never had a tabletop course.
Hmm.
And when I realized at the beginning of this century, 20 years ago, I guess, that restaurants were going to be the big thing, and food was coming in, and everybody was interested in restaurants and food or whatever, I said, Pratt's got to have a course like this. So I developed a syllabus for tabletop. And I taught that from the point of view of culture.
Oh, I love
So
that.
you choose a culture other than your own, and you study their food and their presentation and what food means at home, whether people go out to restaurants. And it comes down to, how do you then design forms that are indicative of that culture and that food? And how does that form present itself of that culture? It was, to me, it just came to me. And I thought, this is the way this has to be taught, because it involves the world and world food. And that's what's going to get to be important. And of course, it did. I mean, look at us. We're in the middle of New York City. And you can have any food you want in the world here, I think, practically.
Oh yeah.
But it was providential. And then I taught that along with advanced 3D for all the years that I wasn't, you know, through my late 70s and through my 80s and into my 90s. So it was for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like how you go through kind of the decades of your career and your teaching career.
It's such a hodgepodge though, because that's, I think in strange ways, because the connections are not just yearly. So
Yeah.
I don't really, if I were writing a book, I'd have a problem.
Oh. No, but it's beautiful that you have such an abundance of experience. And I wanted to ask about design practices in education and how you've seen things evolve over time. Are there anything that you miss?
Incidentally, I have to tell you one thing about the Dunkin' Donut story.
I know
Okay.
that you had done the Dunkin' Donuts logo, and it's kind of funny how you came into it, right?
Yeah, it was very weird. I was an industrial designer at that time on a freelance, of course, with Sandgren Murtha. And Russ Sandgren had called me and asked, because they were a big office doing corporate identity. They were doing a new corporate identity for Dunkin' Donuts. And Dunkin' Donuts had said, well, you're a design office. We want you to design an off the street, just a sit down counter sort of place with all the donuts in the back. That sort of little space that we can put in all over the country. And I said, okay. And Russ thought, yeah, Lucia does this sort of thing. So he called me and I said, oh, sure, I can handle it now. I was looking for something big to do. Um, so this was in 1970s, just about 4 years after my husband died. So I went over to Sandgren and Murtha, and they had a lot of restaurant corporate identity coming in. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be here a while. But with Dunkin' Donuts, I did some sketches, and then I built a model, and I wanted to see what the graphics department was doing for corporate identity. So I walked in, and I couldn't believe it. This was just the Thursday before they were going to go out on Friday and make their presentation outside of Boston, where the main office was for Dunkin' Donuts. And I looked, and everything was brown and black and white and tan. And I said, where are the others? And they said, no, this is the presentation. And I had used orange on the counters, and I had used tan on the walls. And they said they wanted to have a look, you know. And then I walked in and I said, but they said, oh no, you don't understand. Donuts are breakfast and warm toast and coffee and wow. I said, donuts are my daughter's favorite colors for her birthday party, pink and orange, and they're fun. They're fun. And I was jumping up and down. They said, oh, you're crazy. I said, look, take that hot dog typeface and make this orange and this pink. And I went over to the Pantone color thing, and I pulled out two of the strong orange and pink that vibrated almost against each other. And I said, make this one that color and this that color. No. I said, all right. I talked to Russ. I said, they don't want to do this. He went in and he said, just do one over there. Just make it like the hot dog lettering in the pink and orange, like her daughter's birthday parties. And by that time, Lucia was, I don't know, 11 or somewhere around 10 or 11. She's the same name that I am. So Monday morning I came in and I passed Russ's office and he was on the phone. And I said, what happened? He said, go ask them. right. I walk into the graphics department and I said, "What happened?" They look, they're looking. They took yours. Wow. So that was the beginning, 1975. And that was
Wow.
the beginning. And they've kept that all the way through. Those colors have become, and Lucia used to say, I saw a Dunkin Donut and they had my colors on. And I said, I know.
Oh,
And every year, and I didn't think anything of it. But then suddenly it's still happening, and it's 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010. It's like 50 years later, they still have those same colors and they've become iconic. And I never even considered that it was going to be such a success. It was just amazing. And
yeah.
they do not want to let go of those colors because they're their colors. Every time you see those two colors together with white, you think of Dunkin' Donut.
Yeah, it's so true. It is iconic and such an incredible story. Sometimes it just takes a fresh perspective.
But you think, what does it mean to you? And
Yeah.
my daughter loved donuts and really sprinkles on top and the whole thing. And every birthday party I was cutting out pink and orange paper in little things that I put around the edge of all our lamps and things,
Mm.
when I had her birthday parties. So that was really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you've talked so much about lessons you've learned from your career and from people that your family and everything. And I wonder if there's any lessons that you've learned from your students.
Oh, you learn from your students. That's one good reason to teach. It takes you away from yourself. Because when you're designing, it's all you really, you know. You're so interested in what you think about what you're doing. But I learned you have to understand why somebody has done something. You cannot judge things by just looking at it because it may be faulty, but in back of why something happens is a reason why it happens.
Mhm.
And you, as just a person and a teacher, of course, but just as an individual in this world, you have to understand why that is. And I think we're losing that in politics. The reason we think all these people are crazy that are following Trump still is because they're making money being a politician and they're raising a family. And if they don't follow what they think is going to be the big deal for the next few years, which is really a cult practically,
Mhm.
if they lose that, what the hell are they going to do to raise their families?
Yeah.
We have to deal with things like that. And it's very difficult. When you have someone in class that is so intent on what they've done, you have to know why it is the way it is. And you have to be able to connect with that person and be able to think why that looks as it does so that you can truthfully and intelligently criticize what they've done. And if you don't do that, then you're not teaching because that's the only communication level that some students will be available on.
Yeah.
With other students, they'll say, oh, yeah, I made a mistake there. Yeah, I can see. And they're thinking the way you're thinking. So they compare that and they're intelligent enough to compare the two and say, I was thinking in a different way, but this is a better way. Yeah, I can see where that would work better. If the student thinks that way, then you've got an easy student to work with. But if you've got one that's really, they don't want to change it because they know why they did it. That's what you have to face as a teacher. And that's why a lot of people don't want to teach because it's not easy, but it is really fun. It is really, I miss that classroom. our talks back and forth, but why would you think that way? Because of why? And then they say, yeah, but did you realize such and such? No, but then it was because it was, and you're going this trail with them, along this trail, back into little areas and then back again. And you get so tired at the end of 3 hours, because sometimes I was teaching for 6 hours, 2 3-hour classes. And I did that up until the last spring semester. I had 6 hours a day, twice a week. And that's heavy duty.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it absolutely, you learn to think in another way. You learn to consider other people's ideas. And if you don't do that, really, then you're not teaching anything. You're just putting forth yourself. And what good is that to a student? Yeah. So I learned to think more deeply about why things are as they are. When you go to a client, it is too, because sometimes they look at what's there on the board or brought in and placed on the table, and they say, no, I don't think we like. And then you start saying, why?
Exactly. Spark that discussion.
It's the biggest 3-letter word. There are a lot of 4-letter words you could use, but that's the largest 3-letter word. Why? Why does it look like that? Why do you think that way?
What keeps you from feeling jaded about design? Is it consumer waste, pollution, like all of the bad effects?
From what point of view, I wonder? From my point of view, or?
Yes, you personally.
How do I feel? Jaded about what my answers would be to design, or about what design is doing now? I mean, you can't feel jaded about something that's constantly changing.
Right.
And the world is changing, and industrial design is so connected to everything in the world that industrial design is constantly changing. So you have to be aware of where you are at the time and place in history when you're designing. And that time and place is changing. So you can never be jaded.
I love that. I love that. How have you stayed so motivated and focused in ID all these years?
I guess it's because I loved what I did, and I loved what I did because it was right for my kind of a mind. I always wondered why something was the way it was and how to solve a problem. And that's why I used to go down in the cellar, even after my father died, and figure out, how can I build a little thing to go in a corner to hold a paper and pencil for my mother in the kitchen? And, you've never done this before. So you find a way to do it. I think just the women's movement generally, I think men have to get used to seeing women in other positions. And a lot of men still see women as their wives home, cooking dinner and taking care of the kids. And until they see a lot of women now, you see a lot of women now in reporting and in news circulation and news communication, both on radio and on television, and a lot of women reporters all over the world. Even though it doesn't seem to have made a difference with us as president, when you think of the number of countries, I think it's 20 some countries that have had women as the head of the country. And yet here it doesn't seem to have made a difference. We're dealing with men that are used to seeing women in a particular way. But as they see more and more women as vice president, for instance, and more as lawyers handling large court cases, and their attitudes from when maybe their mothers only thought of women in the kitchen and changing diapers. I think men tend to take on what their lives have been in the past more than women, because women didn't know where they were going to be, but men always assumed where they were going to be. So that assumption has led them to have certain ideas about women. Whereas women, I don't see myself one place or another. So therefore, the world is mine. So they just go out and don't think about that. You know, uh,
Yeah.
it's going to be hard to change all the men's minds in the Middle West. I think the West and East Coast men have gotten it because of theater, because of music, because of the arts. But I don't think that's as much true in the middle section of this country. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry to say that, but it seems to prove true when it's wearing a mask too.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I'm originally from Texas and now I'm in Massachusetts and
Oh boy.
I see the difference.
Thing you're in Massachusetts, not Texas, now that they've raised everything,
Oh, I know.
opened everything, right at a time when you have to close and keep things closed a little bit because of these two new viruses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
Um, but the last thing I wanted to ask is there was one last question, and I think this is a little funny because we're chatting today because you just have so much experience and you have such strong stories and I love your storytelling. I know you were talking about that before, but I love all of your stories. But someone asked, do you ever get tired of your age being a part of the conversations about work?
I don't think I ever get tired of anything because eventually I'm going to die and then I won't know anything anymore. And so everything that happens is interesting. And
Hmm.
the older you get, the more you realize that you're not going to be here all the time. When you're
Hmm.
young, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't live to be the age that I am. My eyes have kept me now from traveling and all, and that's a detriment. But I'm really lucky that I can walk as far as I can and take care of myself, have my own apartment, do my own wash. I never let anybody do anything for me as I get older. And don't any of you out there let people do things for you as you get older. Don't do that. The less you do every day, the less you will do every day. So you
Mm,
always think ahead. You're going to do more the next day because your body will let you do it if you push. But a lot of people, as they get older, don't push.
yeah.
So, my interest in my profession is one thing that has kept me really interested in everything, you know, and how to do it and why.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I love how you talk about design as a lifestyle and that design really
Oh,
speaks
yeah.
to you at certain times in your life. And it's so important to just have a passion for what you do.
I mean, if you don't have a passion for this and if you're not willing to stay up all night to make it better, even though you know it's okay, if you don't have that passion, maybe you should think about another field. And they'd all go, what?
But it's so true. It's so
Oh,
true.
yeah. Well, you guys are great. And I hope all the women that are watching this are realizing that their potential is so great now. And they just have to push a little bit harder than the guys. They just have to figure out what is their pathway and don't take no for an answer ever. It's always, yes, I can do it.
That is so true. Well, thank you so much, Lucia. It was wonderful to meet you, and we've
Boy,
got
it's great
such
knowing
wonderful
you.
stories today.
It's great knowing you and all of everyone that's watching. I wish you the best of luck and all stay well, wear your mask. And when all of this is over, it's going to be different. But industrial designers are going to be able to adapt better because we're used to making big changes in everybody's life when we design things. So you be aware and good luck.